Live. How's it going, everybody? It's your boy Wardy, and I'm accompanied by a very special guest today. You guys may have known him in various ways, and currently the host of the Unfiltered podcast covering all things sports. I have here Casey Stern today. Casey will be joining me as we'll be breaking down all the latest in Mets land. He's a diehard Mets fan like myself, a more seasoned Mets fan like myself. He's been through a lot of trials and tribulations that I still have yet to go to as a young fan. So we're going to be breaking down everything you need to know about the latest, including the latest pitching targets for the Mets and the outlook of the offseason as a whole. You know, something that I've definitely been trying to hone in on the channel this offseason is by having as many different guests as possible with varying opinions, but especially for Casey here, I'm really interested to see what his viewpoint and perspective has been so far on the Mets moves or lack thereof so far this offseason. What is his ideal offseason that he would like to see? What are all the latest reports that we have discussed and we'll discuss further in tonight's show? And then some is what we're about to break down. But everyone first chiming in live and on replay, I greatly appreciate that. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button for your boy. Also, shout out to BetUS for being the sponsor of today's video. But Casey, how are you doing today, my friend?
Wardy, what's going on, buddy?
Thank
Good
you
to
so
be
much
here
for
with you,
coming
bud.
on. I appreciate it. Casey,
Yeah, of course.
For those that aren't too aware with yourself, give a quick rundown. Who is Casey Stern for the Mets fans out there that are ill-informed?
Yeah, I joked on X or Twitter, if you will, that I should have brought my therapist. That's a question more for them than probably me. Who is Casey Stern? But I've been covering baseball for over 20 years. I was at MLB.com from 2004 to 2008. I covered the Mets for 2 seasons and was on the homepage of that site every day. Also was on Diamond Vision at Shea Stadium in the last year every day during batting practice, doing a show on there. So I covered the Mets during 06 and 07, which were some good times and some that were in need of a lot of therapy. Remember being there with Tom Glavine officially against the Marlins, 7-0, ending what was a disaster in the making. Then I ended up doing 13 seasons on the radio on Sirius XM on the baseball channel on Sirius XM's MLB Network Radio. I covered the postseason for Turner Sports and hosted with Pedro Martinez and Gary Sheffield and Dusty Baker for the first couple of years. Then Jimmy Rollins did 7 seasons there. I hosted 3 NCAA tournaments for Turner. Did 4 years at NBA TV. I was Ernie Johnson's backup on Inside the NBA for 4 seasons and did 3 NBA finals. So I've done a lot of sports, and for me, there are 2 things that have remained static, and that is the fact that the team behind me that you hate, the Islanders, and the Mets, who we both love, still drive me nuts. So I'm a fan at heart first and foremost, and you can get me on Twitter or X at Casey Stern. And that's everybody except the X's because we don't want them. Do you call it, by the way, do you call it Twitter now still?
I call it Twitter still. It's always going to be Twitter.
Me too.
You know,
me
like
too.
if they need me to say X, then I'll say X. But more often than not, I say Twitter. But
I can't do it.
Casey, quite the rundown. Especially during your time covering the Mets specifically 06, 07. There's definitely a lot to take away from there, and everything you've done since as well. I mean, it speaks for itself. I truly am grateful to have you on here as someone who doesn't only have a great Mets mind, but a sports mind. I mean, you are as diverse as they come, and you've been right up there with the big guns for a number of years, and I'm really excited to have you in now for this breakdown. And I want to shout out, I see Subway to Shea, shout out to Anthony Rivera, appreciate you being here, shout out to John, great member, PB, Juan, all you guys, appreciate everyone chiming in live on our replays. We're about to break down the latest in Mets land, myself and Casey Stern. But Casey, let's hop right in now, okay? We look at the Mets so far, and let's take a step back, actually, because you and I haven't really spoken in a minute now. So I want to know, what's your thoughts about the conclusion of 2023 and the direction the Mets now have for 2024 under David Stearns? Let it all out. If you got frustrations, if you understand everything, whatever it is, let me hear it.
Nobody understands everything. So first of all, I mean, clearly the Mets, I mean, you never understand everything, but clearly we don't understand anything. It's part of being a Met fan and the psychosis that we all live through. To me, this is about the Mets, and let's go back to last year. I thought at the deadline, the way the Mets put the tail, and Steve Cohen put the tail between the legs and paid to go get prospect heavier, get rid of the guys who were turning 65 years old in the rotation, admit the mistakes, lick the wounds, and say, unlike San Diego and unlike the Yankees who didn't do anything at the deadline to go the other way who should have, to say, hey, look, we made mistakes and we know we need to take a step back. And then adding a David Stearns, which clearly then gives you direction, right? Is Mendoza Craig Counsell? He's not. But of the other guys who were available, here's a guy who's a seasoned vet in baseball, really smart guy, and can grow with a team that needs time. To me, this is a team that needs time. That's what it's about. I mean, Met fans, we all want And this is just a New York thing in general. We want it now. We want it yesterday. But with this team, we have to be prepared for this to take time. And I think that's really what this offseason is about. It's about not jumping the gun beyond, obviously, Yamamoto, who would have been fantastic and been a game changer to make you relevant this year, and beyond, put you in a much better spot 25, 26, 27, and forward. Beyond that kind of a name, how many guys are out there that are going to make this team a relevant postseason force comparatively to where I am here in Atlanta, where the Braves are just a way better roster right now? I think this is a year of patience, and it's got to be an offseason of patience. And patience is not something that's a virtue of Met fans like you, me, or anybody else who's ever watched this team. That, to me, is the problem, is the battle against kind of yourself about, hey, this is the direction we should take, but you don't want to be patient. You want to see bigger names, and I think they need to take their time.
You hit the nail on the head, Casey. It's all about patience. This market, as someone who's covered this club to an absolute T for over 3 years now, I've dealt with this entire fan base. I went through the highs, I went through the lows, and everything in between. And one thing has always been a constant: there has been no patience, rather lack thereof, has been the emphasis this entire time that I've noticed, at least as a younger Mets fan. And to add insult to injury, this is now a Mets fandom that went the past 2 off seasons in certain ways feeling like we won the off seasons, right? With these blockbuster signings, these blockbuster names you're signing. And yes, it didn't work out. It ended up failing terribly. But the Mets' ability to pivot as fast as they did, I think, needs to be acknowledged in its own right. Because let's be frank, if this was under the Wilpons, you are making sure that Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander are pitching until after they're already buried. Like, it's going to continue. And it's different now under Cohen, having the understanding, saying, hey, if I have to eat the money to make this team better going forward, I will certainly do that. And now you bring in David Stearns, who is a brilliant baseball mind. I cannot say enough good things about what he did as assistant GM with the Astros. Then, of course, really helping a pitching lab there in Milwaukee in large parts, with always churning out not only a top rotation and bullpen every year during his time at the helm, but also defensively. The Brewers have consistently been a top 5 team defensively in baseball, under Stearns in particular. Now, why is this an issue when talking to Mets fans? Because you're Mets fans, you think, oh, wow, this all sounds good and great. This isn't the Milwaukee Brewers, so because this isn't a small market team where they know their expectations every year, is just hoping for a fun season, hoping we crack playoffs, and that's basically that, or that's been the norm for the past 20 plus years. It's different here in this big market like New York, because even though Mets don't have a lot of storied success as a franchise, they're always in headlines. They're always going to be, catching strays, either for good or bad reasons. They're always going to be involved in the conversation. I mean, the amount of years as a young fan, prior to me covering the Mets, we're talking 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, that stretch. Every single year, preseason rankings had the Mets as a top 5 or top 7 team. Mind you, outside of 2015, which, again, was thankful because of the large moves that they did with Yoenis Cespedes and down the stretch. 2016, they fell short in the wild card. But 2017, 2018 in particular, like, these rosters left a lot to be desired. But because they're the Mets and they're New York, they're always heavily in the public eye. So fans are constantly led to believe that this is a team that's going to go out and do better, what ultimately the results were. So as we fast forward now to present day, the 2024 Mets, how do they vary? We all knew from the beginning that this would be an adjustment year. We knew the Mets' intent heading into the season is to be highly competitive, hopefully crack a playoff spot, do their best Diamondbacks, or from 2 years ago, Phillies' impression of just cracking a wild card and seeing where it takes you. And truthfully, I don't think that's a bad thing when you look at this year's free agent market versus next year's and how much better the pitching options are depth-wise. But then you also look at the fan appeal at the end of the day. Mets fans, as much as this team may go out and have a very surprising and solid 2024 season where they crack playoffs and actually show up in the wild card, unlike they did 2 seasons ago, which, Casey, if I'm not mistaken, that was one of the last times that we spoke, as a matter of fact. You look at things now, it's a different dynamic from how the fan perspective is to the reality of the organization. So I know you preach patience, like you said, but for fans in particular that are believing that this team is trying to churn out a club that has no intent to even have playoff play, to even try to get there, what would your response to that be?
2 things. First of all, anybody can win and get to a wild card scenario in which you're viable, because all you got to do is really be a 500 team. When you get to the All-Star break and moving beyond, you're going to have a chance to be in the mix and to surprise. But I don't think that this is a team that's planning to do that. If it happens, it'll be accidental. I want to go back to something that you said before and give you a parallel from something I covered that I think is a good nugget for Met fans to kind of keep in mind. A lot of people look at it and say, okay, well, David Stearns comes over and now he gets the keys, right? I mean, he had to sit there and drive it. Nothing against anybody who has this car. First thing that came to mind, Dodge Neon, and now he's got like a Porsche 911 and he just got a Lamborghini and he can go ahead and ride. It's not going to be like that. He's going to sit there and utilize the knowledge and what he's gone through of having to squeeze as much as he can out of the orange to now figure out how to build a system, how to develop better analytics, how to develop better trends. You talk about defense. That's work from the minors fundamentally all the way up to the majors for all of the Brewers. And by the way, Craig Counsell, who started in development and player development for the Brewers before he managed that team. But where has this been seen before and positively? Andrew Friedman. Because I covered and was there during the World Series when the Rays were there, and Andrew Friedman was the GM. And he was doing it with smoke and mirrors and Joe Madden, and they had nothing. They had no money, and guys would leave. And, you had all those young kids, and outside Evan Longoria, who signed there seemingly to eternity at the time, they didn't have anything. Then he went to L.A., but he took time. He developed his system. He developed his brass around him, which I think David Stearns will continue to grow, the amount of people that he wants in that front office to help him so he can have better minds in there. Remember, who did Andrew Friedman bring in? Alex Anthopoulos, Josh Burns, other GMs who then went on to go ahead and run other clubs. I think David Stearns is going to see this as a process the same way, and eventually will start spending these dollars that Steve Cohen has. I just don't think it's going to be this offseason. And I would say to the Mets fans who are worried about that, to me, you can't complain and say, hey, look, I don't want to see old players who are near the end, and then complain and say, I don't want to see young prospects either. It's one way or the other. I think Met fans are going to get to see the youth. They're going to get to see the chances and opportunities of young players as 2024 goes on. And that's something you got to get behind and get excited about. Let those kids learn, then spend the money to build around that young talent that you have in this system now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's important for us Mets fans to realize that David Stearns, what he was coming into initially, so much work still needs to be done. Like when Steve Cohen became owner, you want to talk about analytics? Those things didn't exist in the organization prior to Steve Cohen. So they have so much work to do. And I'm glad that you highlighted a guy like Friedman, for example, and that doesn't just go for him. It also goes for the Astros as well. These are organizations, and of course, Tampa since Friedman has left, they've still had great success in doing what they do. And their philosophy is by building this sustainable structure from front office down, by not having this constant rotation of different coaching staffs every couple of years, by having a front office that have been there for the past 5 to 10 years now. Having structure is so important. That's another key factor as to why the Mets brought David Stearns in. They didn't bring David Stearns in hopes that he would be kind of, a short-term filler the way that Billy Epler certainly was. They brought him in to hopefully be their long-term guy, which begins now here in 2024. So as we take a look at the lack of Mets moves they've done so far this offseason, yes, losing Yamamoto certainly hurts. It sucks more knowing that he did, in essence, pretty much use the team. I know that we've seen many instances where that's happened with other clubs, but it stings more when it's someone of Yamamoto's caliber, knowing how much he would have drastically changed not only the rotation, but even just the Mets' odds of making playoffs in 2024. It would have changed greatly. And we've also known that Yamamoto was that one exception. The reason why they didn't go out of their way to trade for Juan Soto, why give up all these assets when you can go try to get him next offseason? I understand that. Yamamoto made all the sense in the world to go after because he fit the short and long-term bill. Now that he's not an option, you look at what else is out there. You got Blake Snell, you got Jordan Montgomery, Shota Imanaga. That's your 1, 2, 3 of the sexy names, if you even want to call them that, currently available in the free agent market. Then from there, you have all the other guys, which is what the Mets seem like they're going to be landing, those short-term filler options like a Sean Manaea, like a Mike Clevenger, like a Hyun-Jin Ryu, like even, I'm probably blanking on a name or two, Brandon Woodruff, who when healthy has Cy Young caliber stuff. So my question to you, Casey, is after losing out on Yamamoto, you know how much this Mets team still needs to add to this rotation. Do you think what they're planning to do, from what we're hearing, that they're going to go with a short-term route versus, say, wanting to overpay potentially for a Blake Snell on a long-term deal, overpay for really a mid-rotation option, Jordan Montgomery? Shota Imanaga, I think, is an exception to go after, but I have a feeling that the Mets have a hard line to stand on really the price point they're willing to go for, again, another mid-rotation type. Do you think that's the right philosophy by the Mets in your personal fan opinion? Or do you think that they should go heavy after these guys versus the short-term stopgaps for the back end of the rotation?
I mean, my fan opinion, and I think analytically are the same, and that is that if you go ahead and go pay, depending upon what you hear or believe, and people I talk to, it all depends on the bidding. But Blake
Wait, hold
Snell's
on.
trying
Give
to
me
get
1
200.
second, Casey, because for whatever reason,
Sure.
I can't hear you now. So I'm going to try to troubleshoot this. No one did anything wrong. I unfortunately have had this issue like 2 other times in the past. But I think what we may be able to do, Casey, if it's not a hassle on your end, can I call you on your phone and I just put an earbud in and we continue the show that way? Okay. Give me 1
Yeah, of
second.
course.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. You hear me?
I got you.
Okay. Everybody in the live
I got
show,
you.
do you guys hear us fine still? Let us know. I know that my volume's been a little bit lower for some reason. I apologize, everybody. But let us know.
Can they hear me on the mic and you just can't hear me? Is that what you're saying? Or can they not hear me either?
Yeah, I know they can hear you. I just want to make sure we're not echoing too hard.
I got
Yeah, that's basically what I'm referring to.
I can go this way.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have an issue doing that either. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear us. So bear with me 1 second.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, no, thank you. Okay, let's see what you guys saying. Everything's good? Okay, we're rolling. Awesome. All right, go back to what you were saying then, Casey.
No, I was just saying that, to me, when you look at this franchise, whether it's as a fan or analytically, this is something where you have to be fair and understand that playing Blake Snell, $180, $200 million, depending upon what the bidding is going to be or whatever obscene amount that he earns, clearly it could help you and benefit you, and you'll be better if he's healthy in 2024, 2025. But we don't know how ready they're going to even be going into 2025. And you want to save that money and save those bullets for when you get into free agency a year from now and can better assess where those dollars can be spent. I just think for the Mets, you got to look at innings. You got to look at opportunities on shorter deals where you mentioned a Woodruff. Get him on a 2-year deal. Deal with the first one almost at even money, whatever. It doesn't matter. Who cares? Just toss it away. And then in that second year, have him as part of this rotation. This is a guy who's been an all-star and has dynamite stuff when he's healthy. And obviously David Stearns knows him as well as anybody. Go for short-term deals where you can go ahead and make trades. We've seen, just to give you an idea of some of these deals that we've seen in the past that you don't kind of remember, Scott Feldman was a back-end starter that got traded from the Cubs to the Baltimore Orioles. He was a guy who was brought in on a 1-year deal, like you're looking at the Manaeas, these 1-2-year deals where you bring guys in and you hope that you get the most out of them. And they needed an extra starter with some innings, the Orioles. They traded Jake Arrieta in the deal and Pedro Strop in the deal because
Pedro
they rented
Strop.
Feldman.
Is he the one who famously the call?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes, correct. So, but it's a rental deal for just innings for a team that was on the fringe, and it netted them because of how valuable those pieces become at a deadline for just a couple of months. So I think if the Mets can get a couple of those kind of arms who can give them some innings, but don't kind of cost them in the future, they're Band-Aid deals, 1 or 2 years that they can move them if they do well, the Severino type of thing. Look, Frankie Montas just got $16 million for all he didn't do. So Met fans shouldn't be upset about what Severino got for $13 million for what he hasn't done, because those are gambles. Just like, by the way, the Braves, if you take away the money that they ended up kind of taking from the Red Sox, which is what, 10 mil here for that first year, they're taking the same kind of gamble over those 2 years for Chris Sale as well. I think those kind of deals where the Mets can then turn it into pieces, can turn that money over and have it available in the offseason, those are the things they need to do. I know it's not exciting and sexy for fans. I get it. And as a Met fan, you want them to win. But Yamamoto was your one chance to be relevant in 2024. Yamamoto was your one chance to be a playoff team, not the Braves, but to go be a wild card in 2024, in my opinion. I think that ship sailed when he left and went to LA, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you, and I love referencing previous deals too, and what can come out of them, and especially the trade market. It's an interesting one because we just did see David Stearns do a deal with his former club in Milwaukee by landing Adrian Hauser, who's a back end rotation option for them, who can come out of the bullpen too if needed, and Tyrone Taylor, who's pretty much your fourth outfielder now off the bench, can platoon, has some pop for pretty much absolutely nothing. They gave up not even like a top 30 prospect who's out for the year with Tommy John surgery. That is what David Stearns is known for. It's those type of strategic moves, similar to the Atlanta Braves, what we've seen with AA. It's being on the receiving end of salary dumps, where you know you're still acquiring depth pieces that you need for a strong roster. And should you trade away those depth pieces for something else in return, you certainly can, or you can hold on to them. The Mets seem like they're holding on to both Hauser and Tyrone Taylor because they check two boxes right there, what you're looking for. And I'm not opposed to that whatsoever. And I think for fans too that still have a concern level with Stearns, and don't get me wrong, it's not going to be the pretty season. We are all aware of that. The reason why I personally, as a fan, am not overly freaking out if, say, the Mets' final rotation piece is one of a Manaea, Mike Clevenger, a Hyun-Jin Ryu, one of these types, is because if there's one thing that David Stearns proved so well during his time with previous clubs, mainly Milwaukee, it's the ability to not necessarily make something out of nothing. Something out of nothing, but the Tampa Bay Rays style, where they're just constantly churning out talent. I want to be that organization where we're so analytically involved and great with our player development, where it doesn't matter who we bring in every year. We know we're going to have guys that come in and eat innings and eat it well and do it at a quality rate. And just to give you an idea, and I want to shout out as well Carson, who's a fellow Mets fan on Twitter and his Mets Weekly podcast. He tweeted this, a day or two ago, looking through the rotations during David Stearns' time in Milwaukee. And just to give you an idea, first year, a 3.4 rotation ERA. Second year, a 3.6 ERA. Third year, a 3.8 ERA. Fourth year, 3.4. Fifth year, 4.4. Sixth year, 4. And that was his final year in Milwaukee, I think, in his position. And actually, 2022 was a 3.9 ERA. And then in 2023, where Stearns, of course, had no say whatsoever with the club, a 4.3 ERA. What is standing out about all those things? Outside of the Burns, the Woodruff, and the Peraltas, again, homegrown talent, a lot of it was getting unique in the free agent and trade market year after year while balling on a budget. So if he's able to do that with the budget that the Milwaukee Brewers have, I can only imagine what he'll be able to do here with the Mets beyond 2024. I mean, there's a realistic possibility that the Mets are buyers at the trade deadline and go out and get themselves a controllable starter then that can help frontline the rotation should these mid-rotation pieces just be enough to keep them afloat but not where they want to be. They're likely going to still need another ace caliber pitcher. We all know that. That's why 2025 and beyond is so interesting. But looking at David Stearns in particular and what he's done, that is exactly why I'm not freaking out about the endless depth moves the team has done. Yes, you need to do more than depth moves. However, depth is just as important as having quality. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Casey. Over the past couple of years, the Mets have done a great job by landing some big, flashy, sexy names. But what have they lacked mightily? Depth. I mean, we're throwing out double-A starters in the first month of the season. Mind you, when you have Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander on your payroll, like that's inexcusable. They should never be putting themselves in a position like that, yet they did because they focused a little bit too much on the names and the win now and not enough on the other aspects that are what brings you a championship caliber club. It is the depth. It's the ability to either call up guys through the farm if you need them to that are MLB caliber, which for the Mets, they haven't done great in their player development side with certain guys. And two, it's also having MLB caliber talent ready available in lesser positions. Look at the Dodgers. I mean, the fact alone that you've had utilized David Price the number of years the way that they did, and all these other guys that have been proven winners, proven stars and students of the game to now being in lesser roles because of how deep you are, I think that truly is a recipe for success. So my question to you, Casey, is what has been your takeaway from the Mets offseason moves being so heavy on the depth end for bullpen and other spots, but we still have yet to see the bigger moves?
I'd like to see bigger moves.
Yeah, we all do.
I mean, I'd like to see bigger moves. We all would.
Yes.
But I think the depth is important. And you mentioned the Dodgers. I was just thinking that before you said it, because you look at just look how decimated their rotation was this past year. I know the Dodgers lost to the Diamondbacks in the playoffs, But how the hell did they even win the division this year? They had no business being in the playoffs when you look at all the injuries they had in their rotation. But they were plugging in guys that nobody prepared to have them plug in. The Tampa Bay Rays have been doing that, speaking of Andrew Friedman,
every year,
forever.
Yes.
Nobody had Bryce Elder on their scorecard to be the best pitcher for the Braves last year or to have to do that to go win a division either. This is how teams win, is with depth. But I think, to me, again, going back to the patience and just, I think sometimes, first of all, something that I want to say, and I'm not trying to get on anybody specifically. I say this lovingly, but anybody who's got a problem with David Stearns already is a moron because David Stearns hasn't even done anything yet. He's been there for 45 minutes. Anyone who's got a problem with David Stearns already needs to get their arm out of the medicine cabinet and go literally call a therapist, seriously. And I understand what it's like being a Met fan. I lived through Armando Benitez and the Castillo pop-up and everything else, just like everybody else has. But at the end of the day, Stearns just got here. Can we give this guy a break? What if Mendoza loses the first series of the year? We're going to have him fired? Enough, seriously. Because Buck won 101 games, and people wanted him out like 12 minutes into his next season. This is Met fans are way too much with that. But backtracking. I remember because I covered the Red Sox in 04 and 05, and I was there every day during that run in 2004. And I saw what Theo Epstein did. Right. And he was an architect who was seen as that young guy who was at the forefront. When he joined the Chicago Cubs, I remember him saying, and Jed Hoyer saying, in interviews I was doing at the time with SiriusXM, that they were so depleted in their system with pitching. By the way, the Mets don't have much of it either. Right. That it was going to take them time to do anything. And everybody, when they came into Chicago, from Anthony Rizzo and the players who were there to the guys they drafted like the Bryants of the world, to all of the fans, thought Theo was coming to be their savior. And he kept saying, it's going to take time. It's going to take time. They waited, I think it was 3 years before I was in San Diego at winter meetings, and they nabbed John Lester for $150 million. And that was their first move that said, we now think we're ready. I'm not saying David Stearns and the Mets are going to take that long until their next big move of whatever caliber is going to happen, but it may take a while. Because I think one of the things, and we don't know this, but I think you have to imagine it took place, when David Stearns comes in to Steve Cohen and has a conversation about this job, absolutely, without a doubt, one of the things he must have said was, you understand that I am here to tell you your team's not ready. We're going to do it my way. I'm here to run the club the way I know is best to do it. I appreciate all the dollars you're going to give me to do it. But if I say we're not ready, we're not ready. And you have to take my advice and not over supersede me, as a lot of owners, by the way, do. And Scott Boras has made a living. And I love Scott personally. I know people don't, but I have a good relationship. I like him. But he's made a living going to owners personally over the years to get, because that's where the pockets are, to say you have to have my player, right? He is a guy who I think Steve Cohen has said, I know you're the guy in charge and I trust you. And part of that trust is that he's going to have to sometimes tell Steve Cohen no. Blake Snell, those kind of players, I think sometimes David Stearns is going to have to step in the way. And I think this year they're going to kind of hit the one in the middle. Look, we're going to talk about other free agents. There are a lot of sensible guys, the Justin Turners of the world, which makes a world of sense. There are a lot of players that can help elevate this team a bit, but I think big names are probably off the board outside of the one shot they took, as you referenced before, Yamamoto, which they missed on.
Yep. No, I agree. And I really love the emphasis there as well with not only the patience that we're going to have with Stearns, but also keep in mind, there's a reason why since Steve Cohen has become owner, we're talking since day one when he had Sandy right next to him, making it known he has a pursuit for President Baseball Operations. It took multiple years to get because they wanted David in large part the entire time. They tried interviewing him year one. Brewer said, nope, not a chance. Year two, nope, not a chance. Then we find out after year two, David's taken a year away basically from the game until his contract expires. We all knew the writing was on the wall. We all saw it there. But to bring in someone that has had the success with small market clubs the way he did, let's not forget he was assistant GM with the Astros and had a heavy say in decisions during his couple years while he was there, his first true like major exec role at the MLB level. But he's also a Mets fan. He's a diehard fan. That's why he's here. The same reason why Steve Cohen bought the team, for that exact same reason in large part. I'm going to go on a limb and say that David Stearns not only wants what's best for the team from a professional basis, but he also has that little sliver of wanting it even further, knowing he's a fan. Like I can't even imagine what it's like to be in both him and Cohen's shoes as diehards. And hopefully when they do get down the road and win a championship, what that feeling is going to be like, knowing that they single-handedly pretty much brought everything together. They did it themselves, and now bam, they themselves just create a championship with their favorite team. That and then some is why I have the confidence that I do in David Stearns. I'm not going to be that a reactionary fan that we're seeing from a lot of people. And I think we also need to make sure that this is not me trying to bootlick. That's another thing. I have no problem calling out the Mets. Things are going in their direction because of their own, because of their because of the mess that they put themselves in. I have no issue calling them out with that. But I also know that you need to be rational when evaluating off seasons. We knew from the beginning the approach would be different. Did we expect to lose out on Yamamoto and kind of the way things have went? No. A lot of fans, unfortunately, were, I shouldn't say misled, but got their hopes up, including myself, because of just how much it seemed like that was a strong likelihood of happening. And Cohen, for anyone that has the audacity to call him a coupon, I'm sorry. Didn't Steve Cohen just offer Yamamoto, a guy who's never pitched in Major League Baseball, the largest contract in Major League Baseball's history for a pitcher? And the only reason why Yamamoto didn't come here is because he took the same deal, went to LA and said, match it and I'm yours. He always wanted to be a Dodger. It's as simple as that. Yet it's hard for some.
And so would you, and so would I. I mean, look, and this is going back to this.
I agree.
I think this is important. This is important to note. Okay, I've been a Met fan my whole life. And there is absolutely no way, without a shadow of a doubt, that if I was him, that I would have made a different decision. I got a chance to go to LA, go play with the Dodgers, how great that team is, and go play with Ohtani with that already built-in relationship where I've got comfort level of playing in the big leagues. I've never played there before. Anybody who thinks, oh, it's Steve Cohen didn't offer enough money, he should have offered $400 million, then you'd just be complaining he offered $400 million to a guy who never pitched in the big leagues, because there are Met fans who want to complain about everything. And to your point, yeah, I would get on the Mets all the time. I'm getting on them by telling you they're not any good. That's where I'm getting on them. They're not any good. And that's the reality we need to live in and understand that if you look at the Braves roster and the Dodgers roster and even the Phillies roster and where teams are in this league, they're not nearly that good. You had Edwin Diaz returning in the back end of the bullpen and Raley, and what the hell else? You and I look like we were getting innings up until about 2 weeks ago. And look at some of the names they were throwing in last year when literally, to your point, they had so little depth that it was like after 2 injuries, they were going to who knows what. I mean, it's a joke. It's literally like, let's be fair. I mean, I don't want to go to another sport. It's like the Jets who got one injury with a quarterback, and they act like no other team has injuries in the NFL, and they want to bring all the coaches back. The Mets had no depth in their system and legitimately should have been complaining, if they're the manager and Buck Showalter, of who the hell are these guys you asked me to go put in the game? They need depth, to your point, and strength in numbers. They need to throw darts at the board and take shots. They need to take shots with guys who, and I think you're going to see this, guys on the fringe of the roster who maybe are coming off bad seasons but have had high end before. Yep. The Bellinger type of deal that the Cubs got last year, where he worked himself back into market, is the perfect kind of, not now Bellinger, but the perfect kind of player. If this was a year ago, that's a guy the Mets go after, because those Band-Aid deals of guys who are looking and saying, hey, look, let me come for a year and prove that I can go get my free agent deal. Mets will take that because either they'll sell you to stay with them or they'll go deal you at the deadline and turn you into prospects or more depth, to your point. Those are the kind of gambles they need to be looking at taking in this market.
Yeah, the Bellinger one was a huge one. In hindsight, I would have loved if the Mets did that. Of course, I can't sit here and act like a hypocrite because truthfully at the time, I was not a heavy advocate for Cody's for obvious reasons. He needed to prove it that he could ball out, stay healthy. His swing, there's so many holes to it that we've seen from years past. He's worked on it so much, and I'm very happy for him and the success that he had with the Cubs. I would hope for his sake he goes back to Chicago if, say, he doesn't get an absolute bag from, say, San Fran, which wouldn't shock anyone here. But going back to the point now, so yes, I think you and I are both very much along the same agreement. I firmly believe that the Mets have a lot of talent currently in this organization, but there needs to be structure. And I think under Mendoza, they're going to feel a little bit fresher. They're not going to have the pressure on their shoulders like they had, especially last year. The Mets under the lights were doing their Donald Trump impression, saying, turn off those lights. You couldn't handle it, right? So I really think when evaluating the Mets currently under Mendoza, one, he needs a leash. We know that. But two, the guys, we know he's a very personal person. Pete Alonso is a very emotional player. These guys really need to come together and rally and get back to having fun. This was a Mets team that, truthfully, out of all the years I've watched the Mets, I think last year is up there with the least fun I've ever witnessed a club throughout the entire 162. Even their wins, even when they had a little stretches of brilliance, it was so short-lived that you really couldn't even
No
savor it.
swag. No swag.
Francisco Alvarez had like what, at least 7 games, and I think it was like 6 games straight or so where he hit a home run, and the Mets lost every effing game in which he hit a home run in those games. Like, that should not be happening. Yet it was, because again, they didn't have the depth. If they had the offense, they didn't have the pitching. They had the pitching, they didn't have the offense. It was unfortunately a broken record for us Mets fans. But as we fast forward now into the guys out there, I've spoken briefly about them. So now let's get into this a little bit further. We know the Lace reporting. I've talked at great length about this. So I really, Casey, this is for you. I want to know your opinions about said players. Sean Manaea is on the Mets radar currently as a potential starting pitching option. Had a little over a 4 ERA as both a starter and a reliever last year for the Giants. Why am I actually somewhat appealed by Sean Manaea versus heading into the offseason? Well, after doing a deep dive of his game, he's been working a lot with Driveline in the past 2 offseasons, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with them, but they do a fantastic job of course, working on pitching mechanics, changing arsenals a little bit, and also finding life in fastball. This past season alone, Manaea has definitely taken a step in the right foot forward with his fastball. His K percentage was over a K higher, around 10 K per nine to 3 walks per nine. He definitely thrived in a multi-inning reliever role as well for the Giants, however they want to utilize him. As southpaw that has now brought a sweeper in his mix, is working on a splitty. There are things to like there about Sean Manaea, and I think if you're looking for short-term fits, guys that can eat innings, he fits in that category. Mike Clevenger faced domestic allegations this past season. He was cleared through MLB. He was not fined or penalized anyway, but that's still a little bit of a touchy subject where I don't know how clubs are evaluating him. I just know the Mets do have an interest level there. 3.77 ERA this past year. Baseball Savant numbers are solid. Didn't like some of his, expected advanced numbers too much. However, another guy that can eat innings for you around a 3.5 to 4 ERA next season. Then you have the Hyun-Jin Ryus, who I'm personally not a huge fan of, only because he's 36. He's only pitched a total of 80 innings the past 2 seasons because of injury. He has a big mix of different pitches in his arsenal. However, how durable can he be throughout the 162? When the Mets need guys who can eat innings and eat quality innings, in doing so, I'm not sure if he's a guy that the Mets should be trying to rely on much, if at all, because of those reasons. And then you also have someone, that being in Brandon Woodruff, who is, again, I don't need to harp on much more there. That's a 2024-2025 deal, which I think would be a great fit for the Mets. Even if the guy never pitches the same, it's a gamble worth taking, knowing the potential upside, and truly a Cy Young caliber pitcher in the peak of his career right now, which is someone like Brandon Woodruff. So when you look at those free agent options I just mentioned to you, along with something potentially via trade, Andy Martinez said the Mets are very active in the trade market for starting pitching, but you're getting the feeling it would be more of an Adrian Hauser type again, another depth starter towards the back end of the rotation to really help round things out. So what is your takeaway from all that?
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to the front, I mean, Senga is going to start opening day, and they're going to get depth guys, and Met fans need to kind of deal with that. That's the way it's going to be. I mean, that's what's going to happen. So Met fans need to just understand that. They're not trading for Shane Bieber. They're not getting Corbin Burns, and they're not signing Blake Snell. So the names you have are the right names. You can't do Ryu because you did Severino. And if you didn't do Severino already and you still had that one, hey, we could throw something at the wall for a 1-year deal and try and see if we can get the most out of him, he stays healthy, and we deal him at a deadline, and you didn't have the Severino spot already, then maybe, but you can't have 2 guys like that. You have to go to your point for innings. And one of the things that people aren't talking about, if you're a Met fan and you want them to be competitive, have you looked at your bullpen? Have you looked at the names in your bullpen? I'm not talking about Edwin Diaz when you sit there and you're up a run going into the 9th inning, but you can't ask Edwin Diaz to be getting 6-out saves in May. So what the hell are they going to do when they're in the 6th and 7th inning of any baseball game if the pitchers that they have can only go 4 2/3 every night? And they have to get innings. So I think to be able to feel like if he's healthy, you can rely on Quintana every 5 days is going to be huge for them for a full season. You don't know what you're getting at a Severino. That's why, to me, whether it's Manaea or whether it's Clevenger, those are the kind of names, because I got to have guys that can throw out there every 5 days. I got to have guys who, if they're down 4-1 in the 2nd inning, can kind of hang with and get me through 5, because I can't waste and tax a bullpen in game 1 of a 3-game set against the Braves if that's the way it rolls around, because then I'm going to be asking whoever's next to go through a complete game because I don't have anyone I trust outside of maybe half an 8th inning and a 9th inning. If the Mets aren't going to have big names in the bullpen, which clearly they have not so far, and we know they're not getting Josh Hader, right? So if they're going to have kind of what they got and a mix and match of who knows what heading into that back end, you have to have innings guys. So to me, to your point, you got to go with the one. There's an old movie which will date me. For those who have not seen it, you should go watch it. Eddie Murphy flick from like 30 years ago called The Distinguished Gentleman, where he basically just throws himself, he's a criminal, he's a con, into a political race because his name is Jefferson Johnson, and that was the name of the guy who ran the years before that. You got to go with the name you know. Go with the back of the baseball card. Go with the guys who can give you 160, 170 innings, give you the possibility, if they have a great year, of even more than that. You can't go for the Ryus of the world who are going to give you who knows what. And I think that's the only problem with the Severino thing, because I like the move, but if he is bad because he's not healthy, it's one thing if he throws an ERA of 5.2, but he's out there 150 innings. If Severino makes 8 starts, because he has one of these years, like in the last 3 seasons we've seen, where he's bad, and you're seeing Tyler McGill or who knows what for 25 starts, it's a big problem. So I think for the Mets, they have to go with whoever the most reliable arms out there. And I like Manaea. I mean, to me, here's the guy who's had a career that's been topsy-turvy. For those who don't remember, he was a guy who looked like he'd be a stud with Oakland going the way back.
He has a no-hitter on his resume.
So, yeah. So, he's pitched high-end games, but he's got great makeup. He's a good dude. I think he'd be a good fit. He's certainly got a better on the character side than Clevenger does from what we've seen in the past. Because remember, Clevenger, even before the domestic stuff, had his own issues in terms of with showing up and personnel, and was part of the police sack thing and all that going on in Cleveland.
I will say
so I'm not necessarily sure about Clevenger.
Just the personality Clevenger has, considering he's like best friends with Bauer during their time in Cleveland.
Exactly. But I like Manaea, but you got to go for innings, man. I mean, you know this as well as I do. That bullpen, you can't be relying on that. This is not the 95 Yankees or 96 Yankees they're running in that bullpen. You're going to have pitchers who can go 6 innings if they can.
Yes, 100%. And when looking at the bullpen in particular, you look at the lack of quality that they have there. We highlight Edwin Diaz, but mind you, we're also banking on Edwin Diaz to be back better than ever, when there's a great chance that, Edwin can easily go through his trials and tribulations this year. It wouldn't shock me if he, not that he's a complete different pitcher, but, I'm not expecting Edwin Diaz to put up 2022 numbers in 2024, and no one should. And I think that's an issue that some fans may have if, say, Edwin is, a little rusty to come back out. Let's not forget, the guy hasn't pitched in over a year. Brooks Raley, really one of the sneakier pickups that Billy Upper did as time as GM. I thought that was a brilliant move, and it's hold true since then. They don't have much else. And there's a couple relievers I want to throw their names at you, because most of them, I'm sure, if not all of them. Hold on, just unplugged my phone like an idiot. Okay. What's your thoughts about the?
That's all right. I got one stuck to my ears, so it's fine. This is a new look for me. Go ahead. Yeah,
I appreciate that. So
that's all right.
There's a couple guys in particular that stand out to me. I've spoken at great length recently of both Matt Moore and Brent Suter. They're 2 southpaws.
Yeah.
Moore, of course, starter turn reliever. Fits the bill, can handle multiple innings without a problem, but has definitely looked like a really, really nice southpaw in one of those 1 or 2 inning situations over the past couple of years. Either it was with the LA Angels, the Texas Rangers was really where he honed in as more so a reliever 2 years ago, and he's had great success. Brent Suter, a longtime Milwaukee Brewer, has that relationship and rapport already with David Stearns. Had a really good season in Colorado, so that was like a big standout to me. I'm like, if you can pitch in Colorado, yeah, sign me up. I like the idea. Very different arsenals as well. Suter's more the soft contact guy, doesn't throw hard. Matt Moore does have a 95 average heater, so he has more life with the fastball, has the breaking pitches too. Those are guys that I like. David Robertson, I say bring him back on a 1-year deal to be your setup man. Might be out of the price range for what David Stearns is trying to build for the pen, but I could be wrong. I think he would be a nice fit in a reunion. I want to know your thoughts on that. And then 2 other guys that stand out to me, both from the Houston Astros, and no, not Hector Neris, but the other 2. I'm talking about Phil Maton and Ryan Stanek. I want to know, how do you feel about those options? Because the Mets need to add, and they need to be smart. They're not going to give every reliever like a $10 million deal on a 1 or multiple year deal. So out of these options, is there any in particular that you like most?
Well, first of all, going backwards, Stanek is a guy who's got rubber arm, wants to be out there as much as possible. Hard thrower, as we know, strikeout, swing and miss stuff, which you're going to need. Guy you could put in when you get in jams, which this bullpen's going to get into with inherited runners to try and get a strikeout and get out of it. I love the David Robertson one. To me, that's a guy I would absolutely bring back. I've thought about that since the beginning of the offseason. And to me, you're kind of selling him on, hey, look, at worst, it's going to be the same story that you've had, where you're just going to end up on a postseason team, even if it's not here, because as long as he continues to pitch well, they'll deal him. He's always a guy who's sought after. He's a guy who every year there's a postseason team who throws, he finds his way into every October, seemingly. So I think for Robertson, if he enjoyed his time, at worst, he gets to spend time with his family in New York, be in a spot that he knows and is comfortable with, and then find himself elsewhere in October. So it shouldn't be a tough sell. But to your point on the money, I'm not sure where that's going to net for him. Yeah, I think, look, Moore is another guy who, like Manaea, a very, very interesting story, because this is a top flight guy who was an ace and a game one starter for Joe Madden in Tampa Bay not long ago in series, and was a guy who was the ace of that staff. And they had some pretty good arms there with the Garzas and James Shields of the world, and Matt Moore was getting game ones. So it's been an interesting transition to kind of watch his career. I like him. I think they're going to have to go with strength in numbers. And I think, to me, going back to the depth, issue of before, this is where it's the biggest problem. Because, there are places like third base where I'm not happy with, and it's not good enough. There are places like the outfield where they need a little bit more depth. The starting rotation clearly is a problem. But of everything that we've talked about, the place where they have to get more viable options more than anywhere else, you could deal with what they have at third, hitting seventh, eighth in your lineup, ninth, whatever, as long as defensively it's okay. The outfield, no problem. You could work it around. Innings, you mentioned a number of guys, and there are others, Wardy, that you can go ahead and bring in who could at least give you 4 or 5 starters, to kind of play 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and mix and match all year. But where they don't have those names and where they need to get them in free agency is in this bullpen. And what they have is not good enough. The names they got are not good enough. The names they got are the fringe names who should have been put in last year when there were injuries, the kind of guys who were in 4A,
Yes.
who are just outside of that group. They're not the guys you want to go to in some kind of a rotation to get down there and say, here's my 6th, here's my 7th, lefty, righty, whatever. I think, to me, they got to nab 2 or 3 of the guys that you just mentioned, or others who have experience and can pitch in big spots, or they're not going to make the most of whatever they do with the rest of the roster. Because the one part that'll kill them will be right here. No Justin Turner, no DH. They lived with Vogelbach and still saw where they were a couple of years ago. And look, I didn't like what he was doing either. He's not the reason why they sucked last year, at least not on his own, right? But the bullpen can be. If you're in close games with this team, with a team that is going to be a little bit thin on heavy top talent, and you don't have a bullpen that can hold those leads, it'll be the crutch that kills them. So I think this is the most important thing they got to do. If you talk about what I want and what every Met fan should want, got to fix this bullpen. It's not good enough right now, and it's a major problem.
It is a major problem. And the rotation currently as stands is the following. You got Kodai Senga as your number 1. Jose Quintana as your number 2, which I'm far from happy about, but not good enough. Luis Severino as my number 3 makes me want to throw up at the moment. Yeah, here we are. Number 4, let's just slot in hypothetically Sean Manaea, right? Number 5, Adrian Hauser. Number 6, Tyler McGill, or Joey Lucchesi and Jose Butto. I like that the Mets have those 3 options there. I think Joey Fuego, in a limited sample size, can certainly be productive for this team. He showed that last year. Same thing with Jose Butto down the stretch. He really showed strides in his game. Not a guy I want the Mets to be relying on for the rotation, but someone that, again, similar to the Tampa Bay Rays, where you don't have as many ace caliber names, but you just have a lot of B and C options, right? And I'm hoping that by having the plethora of options that they have here, should they land at least one more starter, that it will work in the masses by just having a bunch of options, knowing that you're going to keep guys fresher that way. It's going to help with the bullpen too and lawn relief. That is the goal, and that is certainly what I'm interested to see how this is all going to shake up. But the pen, to your point, absolutely. And I'm really curious to see which guys, assuming at least one of, if not multiple of, a Butto, a McGill, a Lucchesi, will they be utilized more so in the pen, or who's going to be sitting in AAA? Like, the Mets have a lot of key decisions they have to make on that front. We're well aware, and we've been talking at great length for the rotation. We're going to continue until they finally address it more, even if it's not to the liking to many fans, including myself possibly. But offensively is another interesting one, because recent reports indicate that the Mets have an interest level in addressing the DH. It doesn't seem like that they have a heavy priority to it. So as much as we would love a JD Martinez, who I firmly believe would be a fantastic middle of the order bat behind Alonso, behind Lindor, ahead of Alvarez, to get that type of power slugger inside the lineup would do wonders for this team. But it seems like the Mets aren't really willing to go into a bidding war, say if they have to with the LA Angels, the Diamondbacks that are pursuing someone like JD Martinez's services, mainly because they still are trying to figure out what they have internally, especially in Mark Vientos. So when you look at JD Martinez as a potential fit, Justin Turner basically kills two birds with one stone after losing Ryan Mauricio, meaning that while he would mainly play DH, he of course can field at third or second at times if you need him to. Just not something you want him to do often because he leaves quite a bit to be desired at the young age of 39 now, playing defense in the infield, but still a plus bat, no denying, understands City Field, catches up to the fastball still so well. Turner, I believe, even if he takes a step back, him or JD Martinez, even if they take a decent step back, it's still going to be far more production than what you've gotten with the universal DH since its inception. So those are two guys that the Mets have been connected to. Gio Urshela is another name. However, Urshela might kind of be out of the range for the Mets because he's still more so of an everyday player right now. The Yanks are pursuing him as well, and it appears the Mets are in the market for a righty bat off the bench. But if that's going to be to the magnitude of a Turner or Justin, a JD Martinez, kind of has yet to be seen. So when you evaluate these options, do you think it's the right move for the Mets to try to go all in and have that short-term DH option, knowing you're getting immediate offensive help? Or do you like the idea of the Mets really trying to stick internally and seeing more so what Mark Vientos, and to a little bit of a lesser degree, or maybe even more so, even though he's not as young, and a DJ Stewart?
Look, the problem is until Stewart, none of these guys are left-handed, and that's where they desperately needed it, and that's why they tried so hard to go to that well with Vogelbach, because they knew in this lineup they desperately needed this guy to be left-handed, and that's a major problem. I mean, look, Juan Soto would look great in the spot you're describing.
A year from now.
Yeah, right. Which, by the way, I don't want to get into that. It's a whole nother thing. Like the idea of look, I'm not a Yankee fan. All right, I get it, and I understand people don't understand this. Let me tell you, in covering the game, how most people that I've ever talked to describe playing for the Yankees, it's like being treated like royalty compared to almost anywhere else that they played in terms of the things that go on behind the scenes, everything about being a Yankee and all the stuff we hate being Met fans. You think if he stays in New York and decides not to go out west or somewhere, it's going to be to leave the Yankees and go to the Mets? You're nuts, in my opinion. I don't see that.
Interesting.
I don't see that at all.
So you don't think he's going to go just the highest bidder?
No. Well, first of all, I don't know who the highest bidder will be. And the idea that it's going to be the Mets is, to me, a little bit short-sighted. Okay. Because the Mets were the highest. Being a highest bidder is not enough.
It's not enough for the Mets when you're trying to land a Yoshinobu Yamamoto at a Dodgers jersey at the age of 5. However,
it depends how much higher you're going to be than everybody.
I agree.
Else.
I agree with that.
Because, look, there are going to be other teams that are going to be in the mix for that. And I don't think the Yankees didn't make that deal without planning on moving forward and having him and Judge being we'll see what happens. But to me, that was the worst place. If you're a Met fan, in my opinion, the worst place he could have gone, because now he's already going to be sold on New York. It's unfortunately with the wrong team. And that, to me, could be a problem.
All right,
we'll see.
Fair.
But I think for me, the biggest issue with what the guys you just talked about is I wish they were left-handed, but Justin Turner is the guy, has always been the guy, because I'll go back to something you said earlier, and you talked about the team not having fun. I'll say they had no swag.
None.
Zero. And this team did not, I don't want to say they didn't know how to play. It's hard when you've got, guys who you sort of trust like Lindor, in terms of this from an everyday player standpoint, and Buck, who obviously has been around, and, Met fans, I don't want to get back into that, but they forget he won 101 games with them the year before. I mean, my God, it wasn't all his fault for crying out loud, but they kind of, to me, didn't set a good stage for younger players to learn from. And Justin Turner will fix a lot of that with literally one signing. He is a guy who, in covering it over the years, and I've talked to him, look, I worked with Jimmy Rollins for years, who saw it firsthand with the Dodgers when he played with them, and he had played with guys like Chase Utley and others, said he's as good as any leader that he's ever played with. I hear that from almost anybody who's ever played with Justin Turner. I think to bring him in there and to do a lot of the things that Pete Alonso just can't do because it's just not him, and kind of behind the scenes be a guy who can be that guy to maybe in the right time get in somebody's face when we're not looking, right behind the scenes, in the other time pat him on the back, bring that smile, bring some of the swag. He wants to win. That's all he cares about, and he's going to expect him in. And at worst, I hope that prorated, I can eat some of the money and sell him Justin Turner's the guy I'm getting because of all the things you mentioned. And I'll tack on because I don't trust Mark Vientos, and I don't think he's the answer anyway.
Okay.
So I think you're going to have to give Justin Turner a bunch of at-bats at DH and maybe a little bit sprinkle in the field whenever Pete wants to DH, and you can put him at first or whatever you want to do with him. But Turner, for what he does behind the scenes and the example he will set for some of these young players and the ones like the Gilberts of the world and the Acuñas and others who will come up at the end of the year, I think it's major. I think Turner is a huge signing if the Mets can nab him on a one-year deal.
Turner is someone who I would most certainly be in favor of after evaluating kind of everything the Mets are trying to do so far this offseason. And if the Mets do bring in a short-term DH option, let's take this a step further, right? Let's say they bring in one of JD Martinez, Justin Turner, shooting for the stars, Jorge Soler, but I really do not foresee that happening at this current rate.
I would love that.
Do you think it would be smart then for the Mets to do one of the following things? A, trademark Vientos. The value isn't high, but how much more benefit is he going to get by basically riding the bench with the Mets should he be on the roster? Or B, just keep his ass in AAA all season long and trade him at some point should he get that stock back up? Because he's a quad A player right now in the sense where he's too good for AAA. That's what he is. Similar to Brett Beatty. The guy's raking as soon as he's down there. But up here in a limited sample size and not playing every day, and that went in hand with a Buck's lack of utilization for him. To what degree was that as much Buck's fault versus Epler's fault? To each their own. We're never going to really know. But what would you prefer if you're the Mets and you make a short-term DH option?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think Vientos should be, if he's not going to get at-bats, he should be in the minors and padding the stats and making it look to other teams like he could be a piece in the deal. He's never going to be a frontline player in a deal where somebody's going ahead and saying, okay, that's the main prospect I'm going after to go give you whatever player. But I think if Vientos is going to be a guy who's going to give you any value, it's at the AAA level because he's going to have that hole. He's got holes in his swing, man. I mean, look, I think he seems like a good dude. He's got a lot of power, but he's got major holes in that swing. And the more you put him out there in every day, there are some guys who you got to get him out there every day and you got to get him ABs because if they're not getting at bats, they're just not going to get in rhythm. He's a guy who I think the more you put him out there, the more you're going to swing. And I hate saying that because I know it sucks for him to be in that spot, but I think he probably should be in AAA if they can go get a DH that gets those at bats.
I would even take things a step further. If you're going to trademark Vientos, see what his hometown state in Florida has in mind with the Miami Marlins. Go pick Jesus Luzardo because he's in trade rumors. He shouldn't be in trade rumors, but he is. Go pick Jesus Luzardo, give up Vientos, let him get everyday reps there in Miami. He can essentially be that Jorge Soler replacement at the DH position. Also part ways with some key prospects, but that is something that I would personally not be opposed to if the Mets do, in fact, go down that route. Again, wishful thinking on my part. I'm sure it's not going to happen. I know Miami at times has a stubbornness train in the division. Not sure if the viewpoint has changed as much since they brought in the man at the helm initially with the Rays, now with the Miami Marlins. But I'll leave it there. Is it Peter Bendix? I think it's Peter Bendix. I could be wrong. Or maybe that's a different name I'm thinking of. I'm trying to think. Who's Miami's GM now? And Pobo after parting ways with Kim. They pried the guy away from Tampa. I'm blanking on the name though. I
can't think. He was under Neander, but I can't think of the guy's name.
Yeah, either. I'm feeling it's Peter, but I could be wrong. Regardless, though, that's where we stand regarding all of that. So, Casey, before we wrap things up, I do want to address a comment or two. Appreciate everyone chiming in live and on replay on the live show. Thank you guys all so much. And again, please make sure, guys, to follow Casey Stern on Twitter or X, whatever you call it, at Casey Stern. And please also make sure to check out his unfiltered podcast on his YouTube channel at Casey Stern 17. Correct? Is that your handle on YouTube?
Yeah. It's on YouTube. It's unfiltered with Casey Stern. So if you just look that up, it'll come up. Okay. But you can get it at Apple, Spotify, and everywhere you get your podcasts as well. Yep.
Awesome. Fantastic. Alex with the $5 donation says, hey, Tyler, God bless. Congratulations on the kid. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. What's the chance of getting Imanaga? Unfortunately, the chances of getting Imanaga aren't nearly as strong as I wish they were. It seems like that, again, the Mets are not going down this route for any starter beyond 2 years, which is going to have them ultimately out on Imanaga, who's projected to get around a 4 or 5 year contract north of $100 million. Think Kodai Senga-esque contract. That's what Imanaga is believed to get. And Unfortunately, whether we like it or not, as things currently stand, it appears the Mets don't have as heavy of an interest level as they do in more of these short-term options. Again, anything can change, especially price point changes. The Mets are not trying to penny pinch by a stretch, but they also are being wary on the dollars they work with this year. Pretty much for the Mets, the reason why they're in such disarray with their rotation as to what they should do is because this year's market is so top-heavy. Outside of Yamamoto, there really isn't much there. And I can understand where the Mets are coming from by not wanting to commit, say, 5, 6, 7 years to a Blake Snell or a Jordan Montgomery at high AV value when they're at best, not, I shouldn't say this for Snell, but for Montgomery in particular, a mid-rotation piece. Yes, he would automatically be the Mets number 1 or number 2 right now, but when you have guys like Corbin Burns, Shane Bieber, Walker Buehler, Zach Wheeler, Max Fried, Roki Sasaki, if he's posted, just to name a few, and next year's free agent market, do you really want to fill those holes with the rotation now with more mid options when you know that there is great potential of landing at least one more bona fide true ace where you're spending top dollar 250 to 300 million for next offseason? That is where I can understand where the Mets are coming from. Do you find yourself in the same wavelength as them, or do you prefer even I know Blake Snell's a great talent. His walk rate has definitely fluctuated quite a bit. Or would you personally prefer if the Mets say, hey, we should still try to land one of Monty or Snell?
Yeah, look, I think it would make them more viable to have a chance to get in the playoffs this year, but to do what? Who are they beating? Where are they going? This team's not – that's the thing. It's like, look.
We thought that way with the Diamondbacks last year too, though.
Yeah, but the Diamondbacks had a lot of young talent that was ready. And the Mets have some young talent that's coming and a little bit of young talent that's ready. And unfortunately, they don't have, the Fots of the world who can then jump into your rotation and go help you down the stretch and then go win big games in the postseason. They don't have nearly the Diamondbacks bullpen, speaking of names and depth, that they had there in Arizona, and they don't have Corbin Carroll, unfortunately.
That is unfortunate.
I think for the Mets, but you never know. Maybe Gilbert turns into their next kind of player that there's who knows? That could be that way and give them some lightning in a bottle. But I think for the Mets, again, just kind of hang tight with what you got, get innings, fix this bullpen so you can win close games. And you know what? Surprise yourselves and be in the mix and make Steve Cohen and David Stearns add in July. Make them go ahead and consider a couple of rentals where it's just money, where you're not giving up prospects, but Steve Cohen's just taking on some prorated dollars to try and reward you by getting you in the playoffs. Go ahead and shock the world and be in the mix for something come June and July to go add. But before the season, to go ahead and look, Blake Snell would make them a way better team. Blake Snell would certainly look great at the front of the rotation, and at least put Quintana down to 3 and Severino down to 4 and so on and so forth. But then what happens when Blake Snell leaves the game in the 6th inning? Who gets the ball? They just got too many holes, I think, unfortunately, Wardy, to fill. And I think you got to remember that if you're a Met fan looking at this roster heading into the rest of this offseason.
So while we're playing Armchair GM, my final question to you tonight, Casey, is what is your ideal offseason? Who would you like in particular for the rotation? If it doesn't matter, that's fine. Just let us know. Left field still has a gaping hole. Drew Gilbert is not going to start the year with the Mets more than likely. What should they do there? Is Tyrone Taylor going to start every day in left field? I don't think that's the brightest idea personally, because he should be your 4th outfielder, not a guy that's starting consistently in this. Could they go with a platoon option, possibly like a Mark Canha type that we've seen in recent years, where he's not playing every day, but of course can be impactful. The bullpen, any names in particular aside from what we discussed that you would like, and of course the rotation as I mentioned and DH. Let's hear it. If you had to make these decisions, go ahead and do it.
Well, I'd like to see Justin Turner. I think it would help. And I think it would be great for these kids to learn from a guy who does it the right way, and I think could help add to the leadership in that room. And I think they need somebody like him in that room. I think also it would help because the kind of at-bats that he gives and puts on opposing pitchers would help the other guys in this lineup, like the Pete Alonsos and the Lindors, to not feel like the pressure's already on them. And even if Turner's more of a gap-to-gap guy than a home run hitter, I think he could play well in that park, and I think he's a guy who would certainly help. hit a lot of doubles, drive in some big runs, occasionally, hit that big walk-off knock for you because he's been known to do that. But I think he's a guy who Beatty and Vientos and others can certainly learn from. And I think he'd be good for Pete as well to kind of lean on a little bit, who everybody's always expecting too much from a leadership standpoint. So I'd like to see Turner in there. And I think it gives them, compared to what they've had with Vogelbach, I know it's the right-handed hitter, but a viable DH that at least every day you could trust give you some good at-bats. So I think that would help. I'd like to see David Robertson. I'd like to see them extend a little bit beyond maybe what they have to go get that deal done, because of the fact that he's so reliable that you can go move him in July and still get a piece or some of that money back anyway, whatever the dollar figure is going to be at the front end. But I think you want to make it worth his while to come back because he's comfortable there. He gets to do what he originally was brought in to do and set up Edwin Diaz before that injury happened. And he's a guy who gives you stability, and they need more of that. And I think for him and Raley and Diaz, now all of a sudden you're back in that trek up to the 6th into the 7th inning and that middle Swiss cheese in your bullpen. And now the Lucchese's, the McGills, the other guys who could become the Trevor Williams of the world, if you go back a couple of years ago, all that starts to make more sense when you back that thing up. And I think Robertson is really, of all the names out there, the one guy you trust that can kind of do that for you in that 8th inning spot. So I'd like to see him. I think beyond that, I think in the outfield, look, whether it's a return for a Canner or Michael A. Taylor, who I believe is still out there, those kind of names, I think guys who defensively could go out there and get the ball, I think would be huge for them. I think that the idea David Stearns has of trying to, stop and prevent runs and run prevention being an issue, especially with a bullpen that's going to give up some fly balls, having guys like Taylor who can go out there and go get it in the outfield, having Jeff McNeil more at second base than being in the outfield in that spot and putting you in a better position really everywhere all over the diamond and in the outfield, I think is beneficial. And then that means, again, third base, what are you going to do? And to me, Turner, to your point earlier, kind of helps at least a little bit, shades a little bit of help there at third base. I'd love Urshela. The Matt Chapmans of the world aren't coming. They're not going to go ahead and make some big improvement at third base. Mauricio's a big loss for a year. Turner kind of helps fill that gap, puts Vientos in that 4A spot where we said they can go get Turner, Robertson, go get an outfielder who's a third or fourth outfielder. I think to me that's a start, but more than Robertson, the bullpen is the biggest key. If they do not already add 3 or 4 bullpen names, they're in trouble. They need bullpen depth in a big, big way to have any chance to be viable this year as a playoff team.
There's one reliever the Mets acquired so far this offseason that had a pretty rough 2023. However, I am very interested and actually really looking forward to seeing how he's going to look in spring. That's Jorge Lopez. I think if you look at the Mets moves they've done so far, especially the minor league contracts with invites to spring training, what is something that basically all these guys have in common? They have wipeout sliders. Like, we're talking their slider usage is through the roof, and they see a lot of swing and miss. So Stearns clearly has a formula for even lower end depth pieces, why he's acquiring them, if he can find lightning in a bottle at all, because he's looking for specific pitch usage. That's something that, of course, the LA Dodgers, the Tampa Bay Rays, just to name, if you do so well, knowing that, if say, hey, your fastball is broken, don't worry, we're not going to have you throw your fastball, or we're going to work on it a bit. We're going to emphasize your breaking pitches instead, or whatever it may be. Jorge Lopez has the fastball. That's a big thing. He averages high 90s on the heater, and the Mets were actually one of the worst teams in baseball last year with average velo from their pitchers in the bullpen. They were horrendous. Without Edwin Diaz, they didn't touch 100 on the gun once last year, which I know velo isn't everything, but if you're trying to have a competent bullpen, it comes into play. You want a mix of everything. You want as many different arm slots as possible. You want as many lefty-righty matchups as possible. You also want guys as well that vary drastically with saying, okay, Edwin Diaz is going to touch 100, 101. Then we're going to have another guy that's throwing you, I don't know, a high 60s curveball. Like, it's going to vary quite a bit. But Lopez is that pickup that I think, similar to Severino, struggled quite a bit last year, albeit some different reasons, but has the life, still very much in the prime of his career. I like that. And I just hope for the Mets case that they do exactly what you said, Casey, by adding some more stability. Again, don't need to be the sexiest names. If David Robertson is the sexiest name on paper for the bullpen, that's perfectly fine, because bullpens are made, it starts with nobodies, and then they become somebodies. The same way that no one, and I mean no one, expected Aaron Luke to have a sub-1 ERA in his 1-0 year with the Mets. And then here we are crying our eyes out when he goes to the LA Angels, and he's been anything but good since then. So usage, how the organization goes about these relievers is imperative. And to your point, I really think that that's something the Mets are going to hone in greatly under David Stearns. I know there's so many question marks, and a lot of Mets fans are just in doom and gloom until we see more moves actually happen. But when you take a sit back and actually take a moment to realize everything that they're building, there's still plenty of reasons to be looking forward and excited. I can understand the Grizzlies Vet fans. You, of course, can as well, like someone yourself, where you're tired, you just want to win a championship, but there's just so much more that goes into that. So it really depends on what level of a fan you are. Are you the diehard fan that win, lose, or indifferent, you're always going to be rooting for the club and hoping for the best? Are you a little bit more of a fair weather where you're a fan every year, but you're looking at the box score the most of the season and then you decide to get involved if they pick things up? Wherever you stand, for everyone watching the live chat and people on replay, please know that the Mets are certainly trying to build a structure in place that they haven't before. And I know that Rome wasn't built overnight, but I firmly believe that what they're doing is going to ultimately put them in the right direction for success. If there's anything we learned the past couple of years, is that what they thought was the right direction for success was in actuality just Steve Cohen trying to do his best to do right by the fans in a very short period of time, which is so hard to do. It was a near impossible task what Cohen was trying to accomplish. He took risks. Some of those risks didn't work out. Others did. He learned from those, and now we move forward. So, Casey, before we get out of here, any final remarks you'd like to share to the viewers live and on replay?
I mean, I would just tell people, if you're Met fans, trust me, I get it. I get the pain. I get the heartbreak. I understand. You thought 2 years ago was the year, and then what the hell with the Braves down the stretch and the Padres, and it still looks like they're still. I still got visions of them rounding the bases on the home runs against Scherzer. What gave up not 7 homers, but 7 runs. If you're a Met fan, try and take the pain out of it and look at it honestly. You want to win. You don't want to win 85 games. You want to win the whole freaking thing. This team's far away from that. But they might have the right guy with the pockets now, right? And the right guy in charge driving the car now. Not sure of the right manager yet. We'll see.
We'll see.
But they got 2 of the 3 guys you need in place, right? They got ownership way better than they used to. And now you got the right guy. This is a dude. This is an Andrew Friedman, Theo Epstein type. This is a guy. He's the right guy. Give them time. Let them do what they do. And if it takes a year, and I told you that wait in 2025, you're going to go on a stretch where you go win 2 division, 3 division titles in a row. Would you take winning 70 games this year and dealing with it? You would. So
Absolutely.
Just give it time.
Yeah, and I think that's worst case scenario as well, where the Mets make more moves, field their roster, and then they're selling again at the deadline. No one wants to see the Mets selling at the deadline this year, but I think it's imperative that the Mets keep that very similar mindset to last year, where if they're in a position where they're anywhere from like 7 to 10 games below 500. Yes, we've realized that it doesn't take much to get into playoffs. It's proven that you just need to be a couple games above 500. But would it do more damage by the Mets to not sell at that point and try to go on a run and say they fall short, and then you lose all those rental assets you had, versus saying, hey, okay, we understand this is where we are. We're going to sell again. We're going to give away all of our, 1 or 2 year options. There's so much money coming off the books after this upcoming season too. I don't think a lot of fans realize that. That also plays into the 2025 philosophy and then some. But yeah, no, I think that's kind of where I'm at regarding this team. We'll see what happens for the remainder of the offseason, and of course heading to the deadline if they're in a position to be buying or selling. But Casey, I want to sincerely thank you so much for coming on the show. I said we'd be a half hour to 45 minutes. Of course we're an hour and 15 in, because we inevitably are. But I greatly appreciate you coming on. It's always a great discussion. I mean, the amount of not only baseball knowledge, but just Mets sports as a whole is truly something to behold. And I really hope everyone enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate everyone that watched live on a replay. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. Make sure to follow and check out Casey Stern at his Unfiltered Podcast, wherever you get podcasts, and on Twitter or X at Casey Stern. You guys can check me out on Twitter at WardyNYM, and of course here on YouTube. Smash that like and subscribe button for your boy. Greatly appreciate it. Casey, always a pleasure. Any final remarks before we get out of here?
Wardy, appreciate you. Hey, look, I love this team. And if you love this team, we're in this thing together regardless. Let's just do it with a lot of alcohol at home and safe.
A lot of alcohol at home and safe. Beautifully said, Casey. Thank you so much. Appreciate everyone watching.